There is an old saying among the weavers of the wool country that a great name may hang upon a wall, but the truth hangs in the thread. For a fine gentleman will swear to whatever his eye is pleased to believe, and a piece of cloth will only tell you what it truly is, and the whole art of an honest craft is to know the one from the other. Honora Whitcombe had mended the cloth at Ravensmoor for 9 years, and no one above the rank of housekeeper had troubled to learn her name. She was 38 when the story properly begins. A spare, plain, upright woman with thread-callused fingers and a level gray gaze that missed nothing across a span of weave, dark hair going early to gray beneath a plain cap. She had been born over her father's loom shop in the wool town of Marden, and learned her whole trade before she could keep house, in the one school that never gave a certificate and never took a fee. She held no office the family would have recognized, for a woman could be nobody in a great house, and drew no wage above an upper servant's. She was simply the person the household turned to when a rent in a 200-year-old bed curtain must be closed so fine that no eye could find the join, and it was understood that whatever cloth Honora Whitcombe could not mend was not to be mended by anyone at Ravensmoor short of a London workroom. The morning the new Duke's great purchase came home, she was in the mending-room over a frayed valance, and did not go up to see the crates uncrated. "You'll not even come and look?" said young Alice Combe, the laundry maid grown to a quick-fingered under-sempstress, hanging in the doorway with her cap askew and her cheeks red from running. "There's 4 great crates come up from London, and men in white gloves lifting the hangings out like they was spun glass, and the famous gentleman himself, Mr. Verrall, in a plum coat, telling his grace what a treasure he's bought. They say it's tapestries 300 years old, and a picture of an old duke worth a whole farm. Won't you come, Mrs. Whitcombe?" "He hasn't brought them home to be looked at by the woman who darns his valances," Honora said, without lifting her eyes from the needle. "And this frayed edge will not close itself while I stand in the gallery to be nodded past. Go and gawp, Alice, since you want it so. And mind you keep your hands behind you and don't finger anything, for white gloves or no, they'll blame the mending-room first, if aught's marked. They say the gentleman's the greatest judge of pictures and hangings in all England," Alice went on, undeterred, twisting her apron, "that the finest houses send for him before they'll buy so much as a footstool, and he can tell you the very year a thing was made just by looking. Cook says his grace paid a sum for those hangings that'd keep this house a 12-month. "Cook says a great deal," said Honora, "and has never yet threaded a needle. A judge of cloth, if he's a true one, knows the worth of an honest weave and the smell of a false one in his fingers, and not only his eye, for the eye is easily pleased and the thread never lies. Or he's no judge at all, but a fine coat with a loud voice. And either way it's no affair of ours until the day one of those grand hangings splits and I'm sent for to mend what a treasure it truly is. Now hold your noise, you'll spoil my run. Under 2, over 1. Under 2, over 1. Alice went, disappointed, and Honora closed her frayed edge and did not think about the new Duke's treasures, or told herself she did not. He was the old Duke's second son, come into a title and a house he had never looked to have, on the sudden death of the brother who should have had it, and his grief was the business of his conscience and his God, and no concern of a woman who would never exchange a word with him from this day to the day she died. She was wrong about that, as it happened, but not for 9 days. In those 9 days, the household learned its new master sidelong, in scraps carried down to the mending-room. He did not bluster, that was the first thing they said of him, and they said it uneasily, for a blustering master can be managed, but a quiet, exacting one keeps his own counsel. He walked the long gallery every morning, alone, and came away with a face like a shut book. He had come into the title sudden and grieving, and had set himself to buy back everything a spendthrift uncle had let go out of the family. The pictures sold, the hangings pawned, the plate melted, so the name of Ravensmoor should stand again as it had stood. It was a proud grief and a lonely one, and it made him easy prey, though no one was near enough to say so. On the 9th day, the Duke's own man came down to the mending-room and asked for her by the name the household used, which was not quite her own. His name was Dunmore, a lean, grave, spare person of perhaps 55, who had been body servant to the old Duke and then to this one, and had the still watchfulness of a man who had spent 40 years in great houses, seeing everything and saying almost nothing. He stood in the doorway with his hands folded and looked round at the ranked spools and the dye samples pinned to the wall, and then at her, as she straightened from the mending slope with a length of crimson thread wound round one finger. "You are the woman they call Whitcombe," he said, "the one that mends the cloth no one else can mend. I am, sir, Honora Whitcombe." "I have a thing to ask you," said Dunmore, and the grave voice went low. "That is not my place to ask, and that you had best forget if it comes to nothing. His Grace has bought a great treasure, tapestries and a portrait, from Mr. Verrall of London, the most famous judge of such things in the kingdom, who has certified under his own hand that every piece is genuine. He means to hang them and show the county that Ravensmoor is Ravensmoor again." Dunmore paused. "I have served in houses 40 years, and know just enough of old cloth to know I know nothing. But I stood by while those hangings were unpacked, and there was a thing about them I did not like and dared not say, being only a valet. So I have come to ask you, will you look at them, before His Grace stakes the family name on them before the whole county?" Honora set down her spool. "Mr. Dunmore," she said carefully, "I mend the household cloth, and there's no secret in that. But those hangings are His Grace's own treasure, certified by a famous gentleman, and it is not my place to walk into the long gallery uninvited and finger a thing worth a farm, and be blamed for whatever's found in it. A servant that says her master's been cheated of a fortune had best be very sure, or she's a slandering fool turned off without a character, and I'm too old and too poor to be a fool for sport." "The famous man that certified them," said Dunmore, "looked at them with his eye from 6 feet off and told His Grace what His Grace wished most to hear, that the name was restored, that the treasure was real, that the sum was well spent. That is what a famous man is paid to do. He confirms the thing his customer has already fallen in love with, and will not put his own thumb to the die, for his word is his trade, and his word has been bought. You I am told to trust. Will you come, or will you not? You are told to trust me by whom? By the housekeeper that says you found the moth in the state bed curtains a year before any eye but yours could see it. By the last Duke's own daughter, God rest her, that would let no hand but yours near her mother's christening lace. By old Marden folk that still speak of Whitcombe the weaver and the girl he raised to know cloth better than himself before the trade broke him. I asked who in this house could look at a piece of weaving and tell you true what it was, and every finger pointed the one way. I am an old servant, Mrs. Whitcombe. I have learned to go where the knowing is, and not where the fine coat is. The knowing is here, in this room, in you, and not in any certificate from London. Now, will you come?" "I'll come," she said, "but I'll read that cloth my own way and against the true old pieces this house still owns, and not against a gentleman's word, for that's the whole trick of it. A false hanging pleases the eye beautifully. It's the thread it can't answer for, and the dye and the loom. I'll want the old genuine pieces this house has kept, the bed hangings I've mended myself, that came down in the family and were never bought, spread in a good north light beside Mr. Verrall's grand tapestries. Set the true beside the doubtful in daylight, and a false thread has nowhere left to hide. But I'll not do it in a corner, for a thing done in secret can be called a spiteful lie after. I'll do it in the open, where His Grace himself may watch every thread I read, and see which cloth answers for itself, and which only pleases the eye. You shall have all of it, said Dunmore, and I'll carry the old bed hangings up the back stair myself before the house is stirring. That will not be necessary yet, said Honora, reaching for the worn needle case that had been her mother's, and the little brass thread gauge worn bright with use, where they lay in the drawer among her spools. Say nothing to Mr. Verrall of why I'm sent for, nor to the house steward, for a man who has sold a false thing will sell it harder the moment he smells an honest eye upon it. Lead on, Mr. Dunmore, and let there be a good north light in the gallery, for the truth of a die wants clean daylight and dies under a candle. The long gallery at Ravensmoor ran the whole north front of the house, a great bright room of tall windows and polished oak, hung the length of it with the portraits of the dead, and new upon the end wall the 4 great tapestries Mr. Verrall had sold, glowing in the morning light like a wall of stained glass. And Honora had walked that gallery 100 times in 9 years and never been asked her opinion of anything grander than a torn cushion. She went to it now, and stood a long while before the new hangings, and did not touch them, and let her eye travel over them the slow way, from the great heroic figures down to the very selvage, while Dunmore watched her watch. "Who is that?" said a voice behind her, a low, level voice, quiet and exact, with no warmth in it and no unkindness either, only the flat control of a man who has taught himself to give nothing away. "Dunmore, who is this woman, and what is she doing at my hangings?" She turned. The Duke of Ravensmoor stood a few paces off in the gallery, in a plain dark coat, his hands clasped behind him, a tall, spare, still man of perhaps 42, dark-haired, with a fine austere face worn thin by a grief he did not show, and gray eyes that rested on her with neither disdain nor curiosity, but only a cool, closed wariness, the guarded stillness of a man who has been alone with a great sorrow and a great resolve, and does not care to be interrupted in either. "This is Whitcombe, your Grace," said Dunmore steadily. "That mends the cloth." I asked her to look at the new hangings, on my own head, and no fault of hers. Did you? The Duke came closer, and looked at Honora with the flat weariness of a man protecting himself with rank. "The Mending-Woman. Dunmore has been below stairs finding me a critic of the fine arts." "Well, mistress, have you come to admire my tapestry, to tell me, as everyone in this house tells me everything, exactly what I should like to hear?" "No, your Grace," Honora said. "I've come to read the cloth." Which no one has yet done. That checked him. He had expected fright, or fawning, or the bright, empty praise people bring to a great man's new toy, and she had given him none of it. "Read the cloth," he repeated. "A picture and a hanging, your Grace, are only as old as the stuff they're made of. A man may copy a design to the last flower, and paint a face in the old manner, and a gentleman's eye across a room will take its oath on it. But the thread it's woven of, the dye it's colored with, the loom it was made on, those a man cannot copy out of a book, for they belong to their own time, and tell the true age of a thing, though every judge in London swears otherwise. It is slow and dull, and wants a person who has handled the real old cloth till she knows it in her fingers, and it is the one thing no one has troubled to do. And let your famous man be sent for to watch, so that whatever I find no one may say I found it in a corner where it could be doubted." You would have Mr. Verrall watch you. The Duke's mouth was very still. The most celebrated connoisseur in England, with the great houses of the kingdom for his clients, watch a woman from my mending-room finger the hangings he has certified under his own name. I would have the whole world watch, if the room were big enough, said Honora. A false thing fears nothing but daylight and an honest eye. It thrives on a fine name and a locked room and a customer who wants to believe. It dies the moment a person who knows the true cloth sets it beside the true cloth in the open. I do not want to whisper it in a passage where it may be denied. I want to read it aloud, in the light, until there is not a gentleman in England could look at the two and call me a liar. Give me the hangings and a clear north morning, and let who will look on. For a long moment she thought he would send her back to her needle. Then something moved behind the closed gray eyes, not warmth, but the flat, testing attention of a man who has just heard. From the last quarter he looked for it, a note with the ring of truth in it. You are very sure of yourself, he said, for a woman who has not yet laid a finger on the thing. I am sure of the method, your grace, not the man, said Honora. Perhaps I'll put my thumb to that weave and find it as old and true as Mr. Verrall swears, and I'll say so as plainly as I'd say the other, for I'll not miscall a man's treasure on a suspicion. But I grew up in the trade, and I know the true old thread and dye the way you'd know your brother's face. And there is something in those grand new pieces my eye will not let me love, and I mean to find out whether my eye is wrong or the hangings are. Deny me, and you may keep your fine certificate and hang it before the county, and I'll go back to my mending and say no more, for it's your fortune and none of mine, and your name to stake and not mine. The Duke of Ravensmoor looked at the plain, gray-capped woman with the worn needle case in her thread-callused hand for a long moment, in the bright gallery, with the dust turning gold in the great windows. Read it, he said. In the morning, here, in this good north light, and I will be present, and Dunmore, and Mr. Verrall, whom I will send for tonight, for by God I will have the man who sold it answer to my face. If you are right, Mistress Whitcombe, I have hung a fortune of lies on my wall and thanked the liar for his fine word. And I will owe you, and I do not like to owe. And if you are wrong, and you slander a great man's name before my household on a mending woman's fancy, it will be on my head that I let you, and I will not forgive you. Do you understand me? Perfectly, your grace, said Honora Whitcombe. Then we had best make certain I am right. Let me have an hour with the pieces tonight, and the old true hangings beside them, and I'll have every thread read and every falsehood marked by morning, and lay it before you all where it cannot be doubted, or own myself mistaken, which I have done before and lived. She was right. It is worth saying plainly, because the household did not believe it for a month, and the Duke did not believe it for longer, that she was simply unglamorously right in the way that competence is right, without any magic in it. She spent the last of that day's light and rose again before the next, with her mother's needle case and her brass gauge, the new hangings on trestles down one side of the gallery and the house's own true old bed hangings down the other, and went over them thread against thread, dye against dye, selvage against selvage, and by morning she had it, not a suspicion, but a thing as hard and plain as a broken tooth, small, patient, expert forgeries, made to please a hungry eye and take a grieving man's fortune, every one certified genuine in the same fine, confident hand. The long gallery at Ravensmoor was bright and high and full of the clean north light of a winter morning, and they were all there when she came in with her mother's needle case in her apron and her marked pieces of true old cloth carried behind her by Dunmore. The Duke stood at the end, still and closed. Mr. Sylvanus Verrall stood beside his hangings, plump and exquisite in a plum-colored coat, with a superior indulgent smile, come north to see his triumph hung and collect the last of his fee. And the house steward, Mr. Bramber, stood a little apart, a dry, sallow man who had brought Mr. Verrall to his grace in the first place, and taken, though no one yet knew it, a quiet consideration for the introduction. And he looked at Honora coming in with her scraps of common bed curtain, and something behind the careful face went very still and very cold. "Mistress Whitcombe," said the Duke, "you have looked at my hangings. Say now, before us all, what you found, and let any man here fault it who can." Mr. Verrall laughed, a light, cushioned, forgiving laugh, and spread his soft ringed hands. "Your Grace, I confess myself charmed. A woman from the linen press. It is very picturesque, and no doubt she darns a sheet most beautifully. But, forgive me, my good woman, the connoisseurship of the fine arts is not a thing one picks up over a mending basket. It is the study of a lifetime. I have given my certificate, and my certificate, your Grace, hangs in the first houses of your certificate, Mr. Verrall," said Honora, "was given with your eye, from across the room in an afternoon. You did not put your thumb to the selvage, nor your nose to the dye, for your trade is your word and not your hands. I have done a different thing. I have read the cloth itself." She spread her scraps of true old hanging on the long table and set her brass thread gauge at her hand. "May I begin, your Grace? It will take the better part of an hour, if every man is to see it with his own eyes. But at the end of it there will be no doubt left in this gallery, and that is worth an hour of anyone's morning." "Begin," said the Duke. She began. And here is the thing that undid Sylvanus Verrall and turned the bright gallery by degrees to silence. She did not accuse, and did not flourish, and raised her voice not at all. She simply showed them the cloth. She laid the corner of the greatest new tapestry beside the corner of the true old bed hanging, and said, plainly, "Here is the blue his Grace paid for is 300 years old, and here a true blue of that age from this house's own hangings that no man ever bought and could not forge. The old blue is soft and faded uneven, the new is hard and bright, and the very same from selvage to selvage, out of a dye works not 30 years old. No vat in the world made that blue when this design pretends to have been woven. It is a modern color on an old man's pattern." And she turned to the next, and did it again. She teased a strand from the new hanging's edge and a strand from the old, and held them up together in the window light. "The old thread, your Grace, is spun by hand on a wheel, and so it is uneven, thick here, thin there, alive under the finger. The new thread is smooth and regular the whole of its length, as no hand ever spun it. It was made on a machine, and there were no such machines when this hanging says it was made. A pattern may be copied, a dye near matched, but the very manner a thread is spun belongs to its own age and betrays it, and this thread was born a great deal later than the picture it pretends to make." And last she came to the selvage, the plain unregarded edge that no one ever looks at, where the honest truth of a weaving lives, and she laid her brass gauge along it and measured the width of the weave, and said very quietly, "And here, your Grace, is the thing that cannot be argued at all. This great hanging is wider, edge to true edge, than any loom of the age it claims was ever built to weave. The looms of that old time could throw a web only so broad. It is written in every guild record in the wool country. To weave a cloth this wide in that century was a thing not yet done by the hand of man. Whoever made this made it on a broad modern loom and called it old, and the loom betrayed them at the edge, where they never thought a great gentleman would trouble to look. For great gentlemen look at the picture and never at the plain, honest edge that holds it together. And so, your grace, she said at the last, laying down her mother's needle case and her brass gauge on the true old cloth, the whole of it comes to this. These are not the treasures of 300 years ago. They are the work, and very fine work, of some clever living workshop made within our own lifetimes to look old and sold to you at the price of the true thing. Your family's real old hangings that hang in your bedchambers and were never bought and so never forged are worth more in their faded honesty than the whole grand wall Mr. Verrall sold you. I cannot tell you from this cloth whose workshop wove the lie, but I can tell you it was a lie, for the thread and the dye and the loom all three say so with one voice, and cloth knows neither how to flatter nor how to lie. The long gallery was very quiet. Mr. Verrall had stopped smiling, the soft ringed hands gone still at his sides. The Duke stood looking at the two lengths of cloth, the bright false and the faded true, as though she had laid a live coal upon his table. Mr. Bramber's dry, sallow face had not moved, but the careful eyes had gone flat and fixed. "This is," Verrall began, and the cushioned voice had a thin edge in it now that had not been there before. "Your Grace, this is grotesque. A serving woman, a darner of sheets with a head full of loom town gossip, has spent a night with a magnifying eye and a length of old bed curtain and spun you a fairy tale of forgery out of the ordinary honest variations of handwork. For all old weaving varies, your Grace. No two threads in nature are alike. And she has taken the natural unevenness of the true old craft and, not understanding it, cried forgery. It is the error of the half-taught. She knows a little of cloth and nothing of connoisseurship, and a little knowledge, sir, is the mother of exactly this kind of confident nonsense. You have it backwards, Mr. Verrall, said Honora, very quietly, and for the first time she looked full at him. It is the old cloth that varies, thread from thread, because it was made by living hands. It is your grand new hanging that does not vary, that is dead even from edge to edge, because it was made by a machine. I have not cried forgery at the variation, I have cried it at the sameness. And I have not asked this gallery to take my word for it. It is all here on the table, for any eye to see and any thumb to feel. Send for another weaver, sir, and not one will read that selvage different from me, for the width of a loom is a fact and not an opinion. You have not answered one thing I have shown. You have only told this gallery that a woman cannot know it. That is not a judgment, sir. That is a man with nothing left to say. You are very free, said Verrall, and the exquisite polish had curdled clean out of him now, and something small and frightened showed through where it had been. For a house drudge that a word from me could see turned out into the road. Do you know, your Grace, what becomes of the great collections if it is once put about that a serving woman may overrule a connoisseur? Do you know what I might? I have a fair idea, Mr. Verrall, said Honora. You may have his Grace turn me off this hour, without a character. And at my age that is very near a sentence of the ditch, and I dare say you know it. And I find, on the whole, that I would rather be turned off for reading the truth of this cloth than kept on for holding my tongue, while an honest master hangs a forgery on his family wall and thanks the forger for his fine name. So there it is. I've read the cloth. What his Grace does with the reading is between him and his own eyes, and I'll trouble neither any further than he wishes. For a long moment the gallery hung on the edge of it. Then the Duke of Ravensmoor spoke, and his voice was very quiet and very level, and it was not at Honora that he looked. "Mr. Verrall," he said, "you are the most celebrated judge of these things in England. You have now heard this woman read the cloth thread by thread against the true old hangings of my own house, which you did not trouble to do. So I will ask you one plain thing, for I am done with fine ones. Put your own thumb to that selvage now, before us all, and lay your own gauge along it, and tell me to my face, is that hanging as wide as no loom of its age could weave, or is it not?" And Sylvanus Verrall looked at the selvage and at the brass gauge lying upon it, and he did not put out his soft-ringed hand, because he did not dare, because he knew as well as she did what the gauge would say, and the silence of his not daring went round the bright gallery like a cold draught, and was a plainer confession than any words. He had built a life upon his eye and his word, and a plain woman had asked him to put his hand to the plain fact of the thing, and he could not, and everyone in that gallery saw it. "I will not be catechized," he said at last, thickly, by a servant, over a table of rags. "My certificate stands upon my reputation, and my reputation is—" "Your reputation, sir," said the Duke, "has just declined to touch a piece of cloth. I have my answer." And he turned from Verrall as though the man had ceased to be in the room, and looked instead at Honora. "Mistress Whitcombe, if you are right, and it seems past doubting now that you are, then I have paid a fortune for a wall of lies, and near hung my family's honor upon a forgery before the whole county, and did not think to ask the one person under my roof who could have told me true, because she mended my curtains, and I had never learned her name. Stay, do not go back to the mending-room. There is a whole collection in this house, true and doubtful, that will want an honest eye piece by piece, and it appears there is only one such eye in England within my reach. Will you do it?" "I'll do it, your grace," said Honora Whitcombe, gathering her mother's needle-case and her marked scraps of true old cloth. "It will take the winter to go over the whole of what this house holds and set down plainly what each thing is. But it can be done by anyone with the patience to read the cloth and refuse to be dazzled by a fine name. I'll show you your family's true treasures again, your grace. The honest faded ones the auctioneers would sniff at and clear away the grand lies, and you'll have less to hang and more to be proud of, which is a fair bargain, though it costs a fortune to learn it." Sylvanus Verrall went out of the long gallery with the ruin of his exquisite manner hanging off him like a wet plum coat, and did not look at Honora as he passed, and Bramber went out a pace behind him, dry and sallow, and saying nothing, already reckoning how much of his own part might yet be kept covered. And Honora stood in the clean north light with her mother's needle-case in her hand, and thought, with a strange calm, "Well, that is done. The truth is out of the cloth and cannot be woven back in." She was wrong about that too, and this time for the rest of her life, for she did not go back to the mending-room. She was given the long gallery and the whole collection to read and set right, and through the long bright cold of that winter she worked her way along the walls with her gauge and her needle-case and a plain book to write in, and the Duke came up in the gray of the morning and the gold of the afternoon, and asked her questions, and, stranger yet, listened to the answers. And by degrees so small neither marked the moment. They fell into the strangest intimacy either had ever known, that of two solitary people bent over the same exact honest work, where rank thins to almost nothing, and a grieving man who comes up at dawn to learn the true worth of his inheritance cannot go on pretending the woman saving it is beneath his notice. His name, she learned, was Marcus. Not that she ever called him so, but she learned it, as one learns things at a shared task in the early dark, along with a great deal else he would never have told a fine lady across a drawing-room. "You do not flatter me," he said to her one afternoon, watching her turn back the corner of a portrait's canvas to read the weave of the linen beneath the paint. He was leaning against a window shutter, the winter light playing on his still face. "In 2 months you have not once told me a doubtful piece is genuine to spare my feelings, nor a poor picture fine because I own it, nor made a parade of the night you sat up to catch the forgery. Everyone else in this house tells me what will please me. Why do you not?" "Because you'd know I was lying," Honora said, "and so would the cloth. A false word about a piece of weaving throws out every true thing I might say after it. For once you've caught me shading one thing to please you, you can never trust I'm not shading the next. And a man doesn't want his collection called finer than it is. He wants to know what he truly has, so he can act on it. Half of what's in this gallery is honest and worth keeping, and half is your uncle's careless buying and your grief's hasty buying, and you'll not know which is which by being told it's all splendid. That's the truth of your walls. Take it or leave it." "My grief's hasty buying," he said. "You are very plain." "I am always plain," said Honora. "When the thing is plain, it saves everyone a deal of trouble, and the house a deal of money, and you a deal of forgeries." He almost smiled. Then she saw the corner of the still mouth move, the first time she had seen anything like it, and Honora Whitcombe felt something turn over in her chest that she had thought too old and too plain and too sensible to feel. And she put it away at once, firmly, the way she carried a doubtful hanging to the good light to be dealt with later and not brooded over now, and went on reading her linen. "They are afraid of me," he said to her one gray afternoon, both of them in the gallery while the sleet ticked at the tall windows. "Every soul in this house. I say a picture is fine, and Bramber agrees before the words are out of my mouth. I have not had an honest word since I buried my brother. And yet you have never once told me a false thing was true to please me. Why is that? Dunmore is honest with me, a little, and Dunmore has served my family 40 years. Dunmore," said Honora, "has something to lose by you. His place, his pension, your good word when he's too old to serve. I've nothing to lose that I didn't have before you came, a needle case, and a pair of hands that know cloth, and the good name of Whitcombe in Marden town, and not one of those is in your gift, to give or take. A person who wants nothing from you, your grace, is the only one in the world who can afford to tell you the truth. You'd do well to keep one about you always. They're worth more than the most famous connoisseur in England, and a deal harder to come by, and they don't send a bill." He looked at her a long moment through the ticking sleet. "And you want nothing from me, nothing you could give me," Honora said, and believed it, and went to fetch the little steps to reach a high frame, and did not see the look on his face as she crossed the gallery, which was the look of a man quietly turning over a judgment he had thought long settled. They talked, in those weeks, more than either had talked to another living soul in years, and one gray afternoon, staring at the sleet, he told her the thing he had told no one. "I was the second son," he said. "I was never meant for any of this. My brother had it all, and I went abroad and studied pictures and told myself I did not envy him. And then he was thrown from a horse he had no business riding, and was dead before I could reach the house. And I came home to a great name half sold off by our uncle, and could not bear that the world should say Ravensmoor had come down. So I set out to buy it all back, and fast. And because I wanted so badly to believe the treasure real, I believed a smiling man in a plum coat, and never asked the one person on my staff who could have read the cloth, because she mended my curtains, and I had not learned her name. And why is that, your grace? Honora asked, quietly, not looking up from the frame she was measuring, because she had learned that men say the truest things when they are not being looked at. Because the ones who come close are generally after something, he said. The place, the money, the name. I learned it young, being the spare son, whom people were kind to only for what my brother might one day do for them. It is easier to keep everyone at arm's length and know why they smile at you than to let them near and always be wondering. Dunmore is the nearest thing I have to an old friend, and Dunmore is my servant, and even that is spoiled a little. He looked at her. But you will not take my money above your wage. You argue with me. You told me to my face that my own grief-blind hunger let the forgery in, and did not soften it. You are the first person in 20 years who has cost me nothing to be near, and I do not know what to make of you at all. Honora set down her gauge and for once did not have a quick, plain answer ready. I'll tell you what to make of me, she said at last. I'm a woman who found out young she had one thing worth having, that I could look at a piece of cloth and know it true or false. Not beauty, you can see I've none. Not a fortune, my father died a bankrupt. Only that I could take a length of weaving in my hands and read its whole life in it, and never be fooled. And a person built entirely out of the one thing that can't be faked. For cloth cannot be flattered, loses the very trick of shading the truth to please a great man. Not out of courage, out of long practice at the opposite. I'm only a woman who tells the truth because it's the single thing I was ever good at, and I've grown too proud of it to give it up. The Duke was silent for a long time. You are the richer of the two of us, he said at last, and always have been, and that is the joke the world has kept from me my whole life. The world keeps that joke from most great men, said Honora, taking up her gauge again. It's not kind to spoil it for them. They don't thank you. Now go down to the house, your grace, and eat something, for you've stood at that window since noon and think I've not noticed, and a man that forgets his dinner reads his pictures crooked by candlelight. For the household had begun to feel the change, and it pleased them less than it pleased her, since it upset the order of things they leaned upon, and Honora felt the small silences when she passed. They think I'm reaching above myself, she said to Dunmore one morning, the two of them going over the true pieces in the cold gallery. Mrs. Paget and the rest. They think I've got notions. Now I've the run of the gallery in his Grace's ear. They think, said Dunmore, looking up with his still grave eyes, what small people always think when they see one of their own singled out, that it must be by some trick, since it can't be by desert. For if it were by desert, then any of them might have earned it, and did not, and there's no thought less comfortable than that one. He looked at her kindly. Pay it no mind, Mrs. Whitcombe. You've done nothing wrong. You've saved an honest name from being hung on a forgery, which the most famous man in England either could not or would not do, and told a grieving master the truth when it would have been easier to bob a curtsy and let him ruin himself. If the house can't bear the sight of that, the fault's in the house, and in Bramber, who brought the forger in, and has his own reasons to wish you'd never touched the cloth. That's a handsome thing to say, Mr. Dunmore, and I thank you for it. But it's easy for you. You're the Duke's own man, and above the house. Your standing's not among these people, so you don't mind losing it with them. No more, I think, said Dunmore quietly, is yours, any longer, though it's not my place to say so, and I'll not say it again. And he took up his list and went back to it, and left Honora standing in the cold, bright gallery light with a feeling that was not quite fear and not quite hope, understanding for the first time that whatever was happening to her had gone too far to be undone, and that she stood now between two worlds and belonged wholly to neither. A lonely place to stand, and one that would grow lonelier before it grew otherwise, if it ever did. The break, when it came in the servants' hall, over the bread and cheese of a wet noon, and it came from Mrs. Paget, the housekeeper, who had been swelling toward it for a fortnight. "I'm sure," said the housekeeper, to the room at large, but at Honora in particular, in the voice of a woman who is not sure at all and means everyone to know it, "I'm sure it's a fine thing to be so very thick with his grace. A mender of sheets that came out of a bankrupt loom shop with the bailiffs at the door. A fine thing. I only wonder that some folk find the time for their own proper work, with all this parading up and down the great gallery, being consulted like a lady. There's a press of torn table linen a fortnight overdue that I hear no one's touched, but there. Some of us keep grander company now." The room went still. The maids studied their bread. Honora set down her knife. "The torn table linen," she said quietly, "I mended and folded away on Tuesday, Mrs. Paget, the whole press of it, and left it aired on the airing rail, as you'd know if you'd looked there instead of at me. I've not missed a day's work in this house since the gallery fell to me. If I had, you'd have had it round the whole servants' hall before the kettle boiled. So let's have the true grievance, and not the table linen, for the linen's done, and we're neither of us fools." "The true grievance," said Mrs. Paget, coloring, "is that you've got above yourself, Nora Whitcombe, and the whole house sees it, but you. Being sent for by his grace. Being asked your opinion, as if you were quality, as if all my years of keeping this household decent counted for nothing against a woman that pokes at old rags with a bit of brass. It isn't fitting. It isn't your place. And when it ends, as end it must, for such things always end, it's this hall you'll be crawling back to, and I only hope you'll not have made yourself too fine for the company you'll be glad enough of again." It was said in spite, but there was fear under the spite, the old deep fear of the below-stairs world, that one of its own, singled out, will forget the rest, and that the order which shelters them all will crack. Honora heard the fear under it, and it took the anger out of her, and she answered the fear and not the spite. "I've not forgotten one soul in this hall," she said, "and I'll not, whatever comes. I mended your own good shawl when it caught the fire, Mrs. Paget, and never charged you a word of thanks for it. If his grace asks my reading of a piece of cloth, I give it, for it would be dumb insolence to hold my tongue when I know the answer. But I didn't seek it. I looked at those hangings because Mr. Dunmore begged me, and no other soul could read them, and I'd have done as much for the poorest cottager cheated of a shilling. You may call that above myself if you like. I call it my trade. And I'll thank you not to make out that 9 years of keeping this house's cloth whole was poking at rags, for it was honest work, honestly done, and there's not a bed you've slept sound in that my needle hasn't kept from falling to threads over your head." There was a silence. Then old Trewin, the under-butler, who spoke perhaps once a season, said gruffly into his mug, "She turned my good coat when it was worn through and I hadn't the price of another, and made it near new, and never told a soul I'd asked her." And a young housemaid down the bench said, "Aye, and she took the burn out of my Sunday gown when I scorched it and thought I'd be turned off for careless, and never breathed a word to Mrs. Paget nor anyone. And Mrs. Paget, outnumbered by the plain memory of the room, went red and then white and stumped out into the wet, and did not speak to Honora for a fortnight. And then, being not a bad woman but only a proud and frightened one, made it up over a torn altar cloth with no word said on either side, which is how such things are mended in a servant's hall. But the exchange had cost Honora something, and she carried it to the gallery that afternoon in her face, and the Duke, who by now read her as closely as she read his cloth, saw it at once. "Something has happened," he said, straightening from the window. "Below, in the hall." "Tell me." "It's nothing, your grace. A servant's hall squall. It's mended, or mending. It is not nothing. You have the look you had the first morning, at the hangings, the look of a woman who has stood her ground and been bruised for it. Tell me who has been unkind to you in my own house, and I will." "You'll do nothing," she said, sharply, and then gentler. "You'll do nothing, your grace, if you've any care for me at all. Do you not see it? If you take my part in that hall, you make it true. You make me the woman who has the Duke's ear, who need only murmur, and a housekeeper of 30 years is turned off. You'd ruin me with the kindness. The only way I keep my place among them is to fight my own battles at my own table, and win or lose them on my own account, as one of them, and not as your favorite." She said the word as though it were a false thread. "Let me be, your grace. I've faced down harder rooms than a servant's hall. This one I can manage. If you'll only keep your hands off it." He looked at her a long moment, and something in his still face was working. "Why do you run from my favor as though it carried the plague?" She set down her book. "Because a lord's favor is the plague to a woman like me. A great man takes a fancy to raise a servant, and the day the fancy passes, and it always passes, she's left with the hatred of everyone she was raised over, and no place in any world. I swore long ago, watching fine words ruin my father, that whatever I got I'd get by my own hand and hold by my own right, so no man's changing mind could take it from me. My needle is mine, my knowledge is mine, the good name of my work is mine, and no one can ungive it. Those are the only things truly safe, and I'll not trade them for your favor, which is here today and married to an heiress by this time 12-month. She stopped. "Forgive me. I speak too plain." "No," said the Duke, very quietly. "No, you speak exactly plain enough. You always have." And he said nothing more that afternoon about defending her, and let her go to her gallery when the light failed, but he stood long after at the tall window in the dusk, turning over the words, "married to an heiress by this time 12-month, and finding, somewhat to his own alarm, that the picture they made of himself at a fine table in a mended house, across from a pale, well-bred girl who would tell him his pictures were all masterpieces because she had never troubled to look at one, filled him with a flat gray dread he could not at first account for, and then could account for all too well. Sylvanus Verrall was not so easily done with as a man caught out ought to be. The Duke, with no love of scandal upon his new name, had not yet made the fraud public, and Verrall, with a great reputation to save, spent that gray winter not in shame, but in building a defense. And his defense was not to deny the cloth. The loom width was past denying, and he knew it, but to deny the woman, to have the serving drudge who read the forgery shown a spiteful, half-taught liar, so no client of his need ever believe her again. And in this he found ready allies, the house steward Bramber, terrified of exposure, and the housekeeper Mrs. Paget, who nursed a grievance ripe for the using, and there began to be whispers that the Mending-Woman had bewitched the Duke and meant to worm her way into grander rooms. Verrill came in the last week of February, when the collection was near sorted and the forged hangings rolled away in the lumber room, and he came not humbly but in a fury, dressed as injured innocence, in a hired chaise with a sharp, cheap attorney beside him, resolved to fight where it would do most harm, in the open, before the household, where a plain woman might be shouted down by a great name. He swept in at the front of the house, past the servants Bramber had gathered in the gallery over the spring rehanging, into the very room where Honora's honest work now hung on every wall, and where by Bramber's arranging the Duke himself stood with Dunmore, before a newly cleaned portrait. And Verrall, seeing the gallery full and the Duke arrested mid-floor, chose, being the kind of man he was, to fight before an audience. "Your Grace," he said, loud and rolling, sweeping off his hat, a whine of injury dressed as boldness. "I come for justice. I have been these 2 months a slandered man. My certificate cried down before the whole world. And on whose word? On the word of that woman there." And he flung out a ringed hand at Honora, who had come to the gallery with a length of hanging over her arm and stopped dead. A darning drudge that no gallery in England would let pass the door. An ignorant spinster who knows no more of the fine arts than my horse, and who out of spite and envy of her betters has cried forgery upon treasures that have satisfied the greatest eyes in the kingdom. Whoever gave a serving woman leave to overrule a connoisseur? I demand that she be turned off your estate before she poisons it further against every honest expert in it. "That's God's truth, Your Grace," said Mrs. Paget, thickly from the side of the gallery, not meeting Honora's eye. 30 years I've kept this household and never seen the like of a mending-woman set up over trained gentlemen from London. It's not fitting. It's not right. Mr. Verrall's a great man, known everywhere. There's 2 sides to every tale, and we've only ever heard the one. She might have borne it in silence. She had borne a great deal in silence over 38 years. But the Duke had drawn breath to speak, and she saw in his face that he meant to defend her, to throw his newly inherited name and all his authority before his whole household on a mending-woman against a famous man and his lawyer, and she could not let him, for it would cost him more than it saved her. A great man may keep an eccentric servant. He may not be seen to stake his honor on one against the most celebrated connoisseur in England, not without a whisper following him ever after that his mending-woman had bewitched him. She saw all this in the half-second before he spoke, the way she saw a false thread the instant her eye fell on it, and made her second life remaking decision as plainly as the first. So Honora Whitcombe laid her length of hanging over the back of a chair, and folded her thread-callused hands in front of her gray gown, and defended herself. "Mr. Verrall," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried the length of the bright gallery, because it did not shake. "You say I am ignorant. I never claimed to be a judge of the fine arts, and I am not. I could not tell you the name of the master that drew that pattern, nor the price it would fetch at a London sale. I claimed one thing only, to know cloth. And cloth is not an opinion, sir. It is a made thing, with a loom and a wheel and a die behind it. And those are facts. And facts do not care whether the person reading them wears a plum coat or a gray apron." She took a step into the gallery, and Sylvanus Verrall, to his own surprise, took one back. "You say I cried forgery out of spite," she went on. "Then send for other hands than mine. Send for any honest weaver or dyer in England, and let them lay the gauge along that selvage and match that blue against their own recipe books. For I have here," and she drew from her apron a small worn book, foxed and thumbed, the dyer's own recipe book my father kept and his father before him, that sets down what colors could be made in what year. And no living man can argue with a dye recipe older than the forgery it condemns. Lay it before 10 master craftsmen, and not one will read it different from me. That is the whole terror of the truth of cloth to a man who has sold a lie. It does not need me. I found it, but I am not it. You have come to put out the one eye that troubled to look, before it teaches the others to see. And you are too late. The silence in the great gallery was total. The winter light lay clean and gold along the polished floor, and the dust hung in it, and no one moved. Sylvanus Verrall had gone the color of tallow. He opened his mouth and shut it, and looked for the first time directly at her, and what he saw in the plain gray-capped face was not ignorance and not spite, but certainty. The terrible, flat certainty of someone who is holding the truth and knows exactly how heavy it is and exactly how many honest craftsmen in England can now be sent for to lift it beside her. His attorney, a sharp man who had come north on a rich brief and now smelled, all at once, a hopeless case and a client who had lied to him, leaned and murmured something urgent in his ear, and Verrall's tallow face went a shade grayer. "This is," said Verrall, and the roll had gone thin as water. "This is a conspiracy. A pack of Loomtown artisans jealous of their betters will say whatever a spiteful woman of their own kind desires. No gentleman's court would credit a guild of weavers against the certificate of—" "Then you've nothing to fear from the weavers, sir," said Honora, "and no reason to want me turned off before they can be sent for. A man easy in his treasures does not tremble when a mending-woman offers to set his hangings before the whole trade. He says, 'Send for them, they'll clear me.' I notice you've not said it. You came here to have me put out of this gallery before anyone else learns to read what I read in your cloth. You're too late, Mr. Verrall. His Grace has read it now, and Mr. Dunmore. And the household has seen you decline to lay your own thumb to the selvage, a confession the whole hall understood. And the cloth itself," she nodded to the rolled hangings glimpsed through the lumber-room door, "is the plainest witness of the lot, and will say the same to the last honest weaver in England as it said to the first." "I see," said Verrall, and his voice had gone to a thread, "that His Grace's house has been poisoned against a man of the first reputation by more than one means." He shot a look at Mrs. Paget, who had gone gray and was staring at the floor, having grasped a beat too late that her ally was drowning and would pull her down with him. "I'll not stay to be lectured on the fine arts by a darner of sheets and a book of dye stains. Your Grace, I wish you joy of your Mending-Woman when she has cried down every honest dealer in England and left you alone in a half-empty gallery with her scraps of old rag. You'll remember I warned you. My attorney will be in touch." "Good day," he went. He turned on his heel and swept down the length of the bright gallery and out at the great door he had come in by. His sharp attorney a half-step behind him, already talking low and fast about withdrawing from the brief, and the sound of the chaise driving off went up between the house walls and came back down. And Honora Whitcombe stood in the enormous quiet with her hands folded and her heart going hard, and thought, with a strange calm, "Well, that is done. Now I shall be turned off too, most like. For a great house cannot easily keep the mending-woman who shamed a famous man and the head housekeeper together in its own gallery." She turned to the Duke to say something of the kind, to make it easy for him, to give notice before she could be given it. He was looking at her as though he had never seen her before. "Mrs. Whitcombe," said the Duke of Ravensmoor, and it was the first time in 9 years anyone in that house had put the Mrs. in front of her name and meant it as an honor. "Will you come into the gallery closet where it is quiet? There is a great deal I find I wish to say to you, and I had rather not shout it the length of my own gallery in front of the maids." She left the length of hanging over the chair and went with him into the small warm closet at the gallery's end, where the estate's picture books were kept. Mrs. Paget, by the wall, sat down heavily on the edge of a window seat, a woman who has bet her standing on the wrong man and knows it. Bramber the steward slipped out at the far door and was, within the week, gone from the house altogether, his part never openly named, but perfectly understood, which is the completest sort of dismissal a careful man can earn. And Dunmore, at the Duke's heel, allowed himself the ghost of a smile, and then, being done more, took it off his face, and cleared the gallery of gaping servants with 3 low words and a look, so that whatever passed in the closet should at least pass unwitnessed. What passed in that small, warm room that February afternoon Honora never repeated to a living soul, and neither did he, and so it must be given here as the 2 of them alone knew it, which is to say plainly, and with the understanding that plain words were the only kind either of them trusted. He shut the door. The room was full of the low gold light of a winter afternoon, falling across the shelves of picture books and the one small window that looked down the winter park, and Honora stood in the middle of it, with her hands folded, and waited to be thanked and pensioned and sent away, and had her whole speech ready, how she had served the house gladly, how she would go without fuss, how she asked only a character, that she might find another place that wanted a woman who could read a piece of cloth. He offered her, first, money, a sum that made her sit down without meaning to. She refused it. He offered, next, to make her keeper of the collection in name and in fact both, over any man in England, with a proper salary and rooms of her own and the freedom of the gallery for life. And this she did not refuse. But she did not answer either, because she could see in his face that it was not what he had brought her into the closet to offer, and that he was working his way toward the true thing by the road of easier things, the way a man tries the lesser cloths first before he lays his hand on the one he truly means to buy. "Your Grace," she said, when he had run out of easy things and stood at the little window with his back to her, silent, looking down at the bare park in the winter light. "You're a plain-dealing man, when you let yourself be, and I've never known you a coward. Whatever it is you brought me in here to say, say it, for there's the last of the true pictures to hang below, and I'd rather leave them stacked an hour for the truth than stand here for a speech that goes all round the field and never comes to the point." "Marcus," she said then, more quietly. She had never used his name and did not know she was going to, and the sound of it stopped him as though she had laid a hand flat on his chest, and he turned. "There, I've said it once, and the roof's not fallen. Now you say your piece, and I'll say mine, and we'll neither of us be cowards about it, for I'm too old to be courted round the houses, and you're too honest to enjoy the doing of it." So he said it, plainly, in the plain words they both trusted. "You stood in my gallery an hour ago," he said, "and you would not let me defend you. Do you know why that undid me, Nora, when nothing else in 20 years has? Because I saw what you were doing. You saw, quicker than I did, that if I spent my name on you before the whole household they would say you had bewitched me, and you would sooner take the weight of that man's slander and be turned out onto the road than let it cost me my standing. A servant with nothing protected a duke with everything, and meant to walk out of my life without letting me so much as thank her. And I stood there and understood that in my whole guarded, well-defended life I have never once been loved by a person who wanted nothing from me, and that I was about to let her go." Honora said nothing. She could not. "I am not offering you rank," he went on, and the level voice went for a moment unsteady. "Rank is nothing. It came to me over my brother's grave and brought me a half-sold house and a name I nearly hung with forgeries in my hunger to make it shine. I am offering you the only thing I have found worth the giving, a partnership of equals in the plain sight of God, my name to yours, my judgment laid open to your plain sense every day we both live. Spend what's left of our days keeping me honest. For no one else alive is willing to try, and I cannot go back to being flattered. You have shown me the difference between being served and being loved, and a man cannot unsee that. And I will not have any woman in England but the one who taught it to me across a table of cloth. Honora Whitcombe was 38 years old, and she had prided herself her whole life on having no illusions, and she discovered in that little room that she had been nursing the largest illusion of all, the one that told her that a woman like her was not permitted, by God or the world, to be simply and fully loved for exactly what she was. "There will be a great scandal," she said, when she could speak. "There will," he agreed. "A magnificent one. The dowagers of the whole county will take to their beds. I find I am looking forward to it. They'll say you married your mending-woman. They'll say I trapped you, or bewitched you, or cried down an honest man's treasures to make myself needful and creep from the gallery into your rooms. They'll say it of me till I die, and some of them after. You know they will. You've lived among them. You know exactly what they are." "I do," he said. "I know them to the bone. And I do not care a straw for the opinion of people I do not respect, upon a matter they cannot understand, concerning the only happiness I have ever been offered. They will say the Duke of Ravensmoor married the woman who saw the forgery a famous connoisseur could not, and saved his name with nothing but a brass gauge and the courage to touch a thing everyone else only admired. Let them say it. It is even true." And he crossed the small room and held out his hand to her, not a lord's hand offered to be kissed, but a plain hand offered to be taken, palm up, level, between equals. "Nora, I have asked you a question. You have never in your life left an honest question unanswered to spare a person's feelings. Do not begin now." And Honora Whitcombe, Mending-Woman of Ravensmoor, looked at the offered hand, and at the gray eyes that had learned, at 42, not to lie to her, and she gave him the truth, as she had given him nothing but the truth from the first morning, because the truth was the only dowry she had ever owned, and it turned out to be the only one he had ever wanted. "Yes," she said, "God help us both." Yes, they were married in the small gray parish church at the edge of the park, quietly, in the last week of March, with the first green in the hedges and the whole scandalized county watching from behind its curtains and not one of them invited. Dunmore gave the bride away, gravely, and thought his old careful heart would crack with the rightness of it. Mrs. Paget wept through the whole service, and when the plain vows were said, the little church was so still they could hear the rooks in the churchyard elms, and, faint across the park, the house's own bells begun to ring, and more than one hard old tenant, come to gawp and stayed to be moved, said afterward that the silence when the Mending-Woman became the Duchess of Ravensmoor was the silence of a whole small world quietly rearranging itself around a truth it had not seen coming. She never played the great lady, and never tried to. She wore good plain gowns and no jewels, and kept her mother's bone-lace bobbins and her own worn needle case in her writing-table drawer, and went up to the long gallery most mornings as she always had, to keep the collection true in her own hand and turn away no craftsman or cottager who brought a piece of cloth to be judged. And Sylvanus Verrall, when word of the case at last spread through the London trade, found his certificate worth nothing and his great clients gone, and ended his years small and shabby and disbelieved, which is a colder ruin than any prison. And the collection he had tried to poison came, under an honest eye, to be known as one of the truest in England, the smaller for being real, and the greater for it. She trained clever young women under her, craftsmen's and tenants' grown daughters with quick eyes and no prospects, and taught them to read the truth of a made thing and never be gulled by a fine word or a famous name, that her knowledge should pass into hands that would use it. She and the Duke were seen, by such of the county as would still receive them, to be the most quietly contented couple in the shire, and his grace, who had come into his tidal grief hollowed and shut as a locked room, had become a man at ease in his own skin, who could laugh and be argued with, and looked at his unlikely duchess across their supper table as though he could not quite believe his own good fortune. And the county, which had come to sneer, came slowly and grudgingly to something else. For it is one thing to keep up a scandal about people you never see, and another about neighbors whose duchess sits up a night to save a poor widow's only good gown, and takes no fee. The dowagers who had taken to their beds got up again, in time, and found the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmoor could not be cut without cutting off the most open-handed house in the county, and one by one they came round. A few, the honest ones, came simply to say they had been wrong, and were received without a flicker of triumph, and given tea, and never once reminded of it, which shamed them more than any reproach could have done. He lived another 30 years, the same span, she once remarked, that she had mended his cloth unregarded, and died at last in his own bed, his hand in her thread-callused one and no stranger in the room. She sat with him at the end as she had sat with his forged treasures at the beginning, still and true, and told him the truth to the last, which was that he had been a great deal of trouble and worth every hour of it. And he laughed his quiet laugh one final time and told her she was the one true thing he had ever owned, and slept and did not wake, and she closed his gray eyes herself and did not weep until the door was shut, for she had always believed a person's grief, like the true worth of a thing, is their own and not a matter to be shown off for onlookers. She outlived him by 6 years, and kept the collection true to the end, and was, by the time she followed him, so beloved across that whole broad reach of shire that they lined the lanes for her funeral 3 deep, tenants and craftsmen and the households of the women she had taught to read the truth of a made thing, far more than ever lined them for any duke. And among them not a few of the fine folk who had once scorned her and lived long enough to be ashamed of it. And they carried behind her coffin, on a cushion, her mother's bone-lace bobbins and her own worn needle case, which the whole shire agreed was a stranger honor than any crest, and no more than her due. There is an old saying among the weavers of the wool country, that a great name may hang upon a wall, but the truth hangs in the thread, and the whole art of an honest craft is to know the one from the other. Honora Whitcombe mended the cloth at Ravensmoor for 9 years before anyone above the housekeeper troubled to learn her name, and for 30 years after, as its mistress, and never once called a false thing true to spare a great person's feelings. She was not saved by her meekness, nor by her beauty, for she had neither. She was saved, if saved is the word for the woman doing the saving, by the plain, unfakeable fact of what she knew, and by the courage to stake everything on it in a world forever dazzled by the famous name. And that was the whole of her, and it made her the one true thing in the house. The poor whose cloth she judged honest said it first, and the tenants after, and in the fullness of years even the great folk who had scorned her came to say it too, until it was less an opinion than a fact of the country, worn smooth with saying, that a plain gray-gowned woman with thread on her fingers had put her thumb to a fortune of forgeries and read the lie in the very weave, and told nothing but that truth to a grieving duke, and it made her the one true thing in the house. And it was said of her, long after, whenever a proud man was flattered to his ruin or a wise woman overlooked for her plainness, said quietly, the way the truest things are said, that she had seen with a brass gauge and a night's patience what a whole train of famous men had sworn was true. And it made her the one true thing in the house. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one.